I was given a mere 7 days to relinquish my own ranch or face the prospect of its sale without my consent. 7 days. The pure, unvarnished effrontery of that ultimatum continues to incense me even in retrospect. What this group of neighborhood predators, guided by their self-designated monarch, failed to realize, what they could not have possibly conceived in their most ambitious, control-fueled fantasies, was that their cherished, meticulously groomed domain, including the excessively large beige McMansion that their HOA president, Brenda, inhabited, stood entirely upon my property. Indeed, this is quite a narrative, and you will find it compelling. The account of how I took apart an HOA armed with little more than some old deeds and a justified fury within me is one you are unlikely to forget quickly. It all commenced, as such matters frequently do, with a fence. Not my own fence, it should be noted, but the notion of constructing one. My ranch, an expansive estate of a couple of 100 acres featuring undulating hills, venerable oak trees, and a winding stream, had belonged to my family for 3 generations. It served as my haven, my escape after a lengthy career as a land use attorney in the urban center, a location where the most prominent sound was typically the breeze through the pine trees or the remote mooing of my tenant farmers' livestock. The nearest boundary of the Willow Creek Estate's HOA development adjoined the southern portion of my property line. This boundary was distinctly marked by a deteriorating, centuries-old stone wall and a survey filed long before any of their identical houses were even a glimmer in a developer's imagination. For many years, we had coexisted, if not in a friendly manner, then at least with a degree of separation. I remained on my side, they for the most part remained on theirs. Then Brenda entered the picture. Elected HOA president on a promise of beautification and order, this apparently meant making life miserable for everyone else. Brenda, whose actual name might have been something ordinary like Susan, exuded such a forceful air of privilege that she was widely, though privately, referred to as Brenda the Terrible. She operated a flawless pearl-white Cadillac Escalade, the type that always appeared to be silently critiquing one's own more utilitarian mode of transport. Her hairstyle was a rigid coif of blonde ambition. Her attire proclaimed, costly yet lacking in character, and her smile was a menacing display of teeth. The initial indication of problems arrived as a courteously phrased yet undeniably passive-aggressive letter concerning the unrefined character of my property boundary. It proposed that the ancient stone wall was unsightly and that I might contemplate substituting it with something more aligned with community standards, such as a 6-foot vinyl privacy fence. I found this amusing, filed it under, to be discarded, and paid it no mind. My property was not part of their community. The correspondence intensified. They began referencing HOA bylaws that held absolutely no authority over my land. Subsequently, fines were issued for unkempt vegetation near the property line. It was a wildflower meadow, for goodness sake, for the rundown condition of an old tractor I stored under a lean-to well inside my property limits. It was a family heirloom. And, my personal favorite, excessive natural debris, which I presume meant fallen leaves. Every letter bore Brenda's elaborate, self-important signature. I dispatched a terse, legally meticulous response, elucidating my property lines, referencing the pertinent county records, and politely instructing them to place their bylaws in an undesirable location. I even enclosed a copy of the official survey map. I presumed that, confronted with undeniable facts, any reasonable individual would retreat. As it happened, I had significantly misjudged Brenda's aptitude for reason. She perceived my factual counter-argument not as a rectification but as an affront to her dominance. Her small fiefdom was being challenged, and she could not tolerate that. For several months, the situation remained tense. Periodically, I would observe Brenda driving slowly by my gate, her eyes lingering on my extensive, unpaved driveway and the thick forest that obscured my house from sight. She resembled a predator evaluating its quarry. One of my elderly neighbors, a reserved lady named Mrs. Henderson, residing at the periphery of the HOA, who had previously confided in me regarding Brenda's tyrannical control over lawn decorations, cautioned me. "She's fixated on your property, dear," Mrs. Henderson had remarked during a shared tea. "Believes it lowers the neighborhood's standards." She informed the board of her intention to address the matter. Exercise caution. I expressed my gratitude to her but did not feel excessively worried. What conceivable action could they take? I held outright ownership of my land, or so I believed, in the usual understanding of the term. The ultimate escalation occurred rapidly and with stunning audacity. A substantial envelope arrived via certified mail. Within, tucked among a collection of absurd HOA violation notifications, was a letter printed on weighty, pretentious letterhead. It declared that, owing to my persistent refusal to adhere to community standards and my neglect in correcting numerous and serious violations of HOA covenants, the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association had resolved to implement corrective measures. These measures, it elaborated, entailed their assumption of temporary control over a 50 feet deep portion of my ranch bordering their development, effectively confiscating it to eliminate the nuisances. And then came the most shocking part. If I failed to completely resolve all violations throughout my entire property to their contentment within 7 days, and also remit an exorbitant sum for accumulated fines and administrative charges, they would commence procedures to sell the entire Parker Ranch at a public auction to recoup expenses and guarantee future adherence. My jaw, I believe, actually slackened. Sell my ranch? My family's heritage because Brenda disapproved of my wildflowers? The sheer, unadulterated impudence was incredible. It was flagrantly unlawful, naturally, almost comically so. Yet the threat, regardless of its legal hollowness, was plainly designed to cow. They perceived me as merely an elderly shut-in who would easily yield. They were oblivious to the person they were confronting, or more crucially, the foundation upon which their own precarious structures stood. My preliminary surprise transformed into a frigid, distinct rage. This exceeded a simple overstep. It was an avowal of conflict. And Brenda, bless her soul, had unwittingly provided me with the blueprint to her entire strategy. The 7-day deadline was counting down. However, my immediate action was not to become alarmed. Instead, I retrieved an exceedingly old, quite damaged tin box from the rear of my father's filing cabinet. This container held generations of Parker family papers, deeds, surveys, letters, and journals. My grandfather, a taciturn individual with a profound affection for this land and an equally profound wariness of advancing suburban development, had been exceptionally thorough. I had perused some of these documents over time, mainly from a sense of historical interest. Now, I sought something particular, a partially forgotten tale he often recounted about the initial land transaction for the development that eventually became Willow Creek Estates. He always concluded it with a wry chuckle and the statement, "They believe they purchased it, but they only ever leased it." I had previously disregarded this as vivid overstatement, the complaints of an elderly rancher. Now I began to question. As a retired land use attorney, my mind, even after years of tranquil inactivity in that specific domain, started to reactivate its customary modes of investigation and examination. I laid out the oldest, most delicate documents on my substantial oak dining table, the aroma of old paper and ink permeating the atmosphere. There were deeds inscribed in graceful, fine handwriting, adorned with seals and stamps from a past age. Survey maps, hand-drawn, displayed complex measurements and annotations in faded brown ink. And then I discovered it, not a single document, but a collection of them, cross-indexed with notes in my grandfather's unmistakable script. It was not a purchase, it was a lease, an exceptionally lengthy one, 99 years to be exact, issued by my great-grandfather to a development firm in the early 1920s for a designated section of what was then the ranch's far southern pasture. The lease payments, considerable for that period, were remitted for several decades. Then the records seemingly became inconsistent. The initial development company had declared bankruptcy during the Depression. Its holdings were sold and resold numerous times. Subsequent developers, it seemed, had constructed Willow Creek Estates relying on incomplete, or perhaps, one might venture, conveniently misconstrued title research, presuming full ownership based on those later, more obscure dealings. The 99-year lease, nonetheless, possessed a very distinct termination date, and that date, as per the original, flawlessly maintained document, had elapsed nearly 5 years prior. My heart started to race, not from apprehension, but with a burgeoning, thrilling insight. If this information was accurate, if the lease had truly expired and had never been renewed, or the land formally sold by my family in the intervening period and my grandfather's detailed records indicated no such sale, then Willow Creek Estates, every single part of it, every last McMansion, every tended lawn, every petunia-lined walkway, including Brenda's opulent home, was situated on land that had reverted to the Parker Ranch. For me, the sheer exquisite irony was almost unbearable. The HOA, in its limitless presumption, was menacing to sell my ranch while unwittingly occupying a substantial part of it. My grandfather had not been merely complaining, he had been asserting a legal reality. They only ever borrowed it, he had stated, and the term of that loan, it appeared, was long past. The following 2 days were a maelstrom of concentrated effort. Initially, I visited the county records office, a location I was intimately familiar with from my professional career. Mr. Abernathy, the head clerk, a man whose service there was comparable in length to the age of some records he managed, welcomed me with a genial smile. "Eleanor Parker, I haven't encountered you in these esteemed corridors for a very long time. What brings a prominent city attorney like you back to our time-worn archives?" he jested. I clarified that I was retired but engaged in a personal historical investigation. With his assistance, I cross-checked all information. The original lease agreement was present, correctly filed. Subsequent deeds for the Willow Creek parcels showed a chain of title stemming from the lease, not from the original Parker fee simple ownership. There was no documentation of the Parkers ever officially subdividing and selling that leased area after the initial lease was created. It was as if, through ineptitude or intentional omission across numerous transactions over decades, the vital fact of the underlying lease's reversionary interest had been concealed, overlooked, or disregarded. Until this moment, the conclusive proof was not merely one document, but the conspicuous lack of a document that would override it. The chain of title for Willow Creek was founded on a precarious base. To ensure complete certainty, I reached out to my former law partner, Julian Vance, an individual whose intellect was as sharp as a tack and whose prudence was renowned. I sent him facsimiles of the crucial documents, providing a concise and deliberately impartial explanation. His telephone call arrived within a few hours. "Eleanor," he began, his voice a blend of incredulity and professional enthusiasm, "if these papers are authentic and your family never officially sold or relinquished that land parcel after the original lease period ended, well, my dear, you not only possess a defense against your excessively zealous HOA, you seemingly own the very land they stand on." He paused, then remarked with a dry laugh, "This transcends poetry. It's of biblical proportions. You could, quite literally, vanquish them." This affirmation sent a wave of adrenaline coursing through me. I was not merely going to protect my ranch, I intended to reverse the situation so thoroughly that Brenda and her associates would be utterly blindsided. The 7-day countdown continued, a detail that I am certain imbued Brenda with complacent gratification. So be it. Each passing moment brought her nearer to her own day of judgment. I now held information that, in the context of neighborhood disputes, amounted to a tactical nuclear weapon, and I was fully ready to use it. The issue was no longer whether I would retaliate, but the sheer magnificence of my victory. Imagining Brenda's expression upon grasping the enormous extent of her error served as a potent incentive. Her endeavor to seize a small piece of my property was poised to cost her and her entire HOA dearly. With 4 days remaining on Brenda's capricious and entirely unfounded deadline, I could almost sense the self-satisfied expectation emanating from Willow Creek Estates. I pictured Brenda at her HOA gatherings, likely pontificating about how she was at last going to manage the disorderly Parker Ranch. I was utilizing the time judiciously. Julian, my former law partner, had put me in touch with a younger, exceptionally astute litigator from his firm, a woman named Sarah Chin, who was an expert in intricate property disagreements and, as Julian described her, consumed bullies like Brenda for breakfast. Sarah was, to state it mildly, exhilarated by the case. This, she had remarked during our initial video conference, her eyes shining, is the type of case legal professionals fantasize about. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of this HOA is remarkable, and the advantage you possess is, well, it's superb. Collaboratively, we painstakingly readied our counterattack. It was not merely about protecting against their absurd assertion regarding my ranch, it concerned affirming my legitimate ownership of the land they inhabited. We formulated cease and desist letters, not for them to halt their harassment of me concerning my ranch, but for them to leave my property, the ground upon which their houses stood. We readied notices of trespass and intention to sue for eviction. The elegance of the situation was that Brenda, in her endeavor to coerce me with HOA regulations, had unintentionally validated the precise perimeters of the land they were on, land that, unknown to her, belonged to me. Her own evidence, appended to her menacing letter, specified the lots and communal areas of Willow Creek Estates, all situated perfectly within the historical confines of the lapsed 99-year lease from the Parker Ranch main property. She had, in effect, given us the chart to her own downfall. Throughout those several days, I made it a priority to be seen yet appear untroubled. I busied myself in my garden, undertook lengthy strolls along my genuine property boundaries, and even offered a cheerful wave if I chanced to observe Brenda's escalade moving slowly past my gate. I wished for her to believe I was unaware, possibly even intimidated. The less she anticipated, the more severe her downfall would be. Mrs. Henderson telephoned, her voice subdued with concern. Brenda was at the clubhouse yesterday, she murmured. She informed everyone that she is holding a special community update meeting on Friday evening. That is the day your week concludes. She stated she will be announcing the successful settlement of the Parker Ranch matter and detailing the HOA's intentions for the beautification of the obtained frontage. She sounded utterly victorious. Friday evening ideal. A public stage for her disgrace. I expressed my gratitude to Mrs. Henderson for the information, a faint smile on my face. The irony was almost agonizing, Brenda intending to declare her triumph over me while situated on land that was legally mine. It was akin to observing a miscreant carefully arranging their own downfall. Sarah and I resolved to allow their deadline to pass. We would not dispatch our notifications ahead of time. No, the disclosure needed to be orchestrated for the greatest effect. Let Brenda enjoy her fleeting instant of supposed triumph. Let her delineate her ambitious schemes for my land. The loftier she ascended on her plinth of conceit, the more gratifying her unavoidable descent would prove. The facilitators on the HOA board, I mused, were likely a combination of the uninformed, the cowed, and the truly malevolent, those who delighted in Brenda's authority because it cast a reflection upon them. I had observed their names on the correspondence, a meek-appearing treasurer who likely just approved whatever Brenda presented to him, an inflated secretary who probably savored the minor power. They were all involved in this endeavor to illegally confiscate my property. They would all partake in the repercussions of their leader's arrogance. On Thursday, the day preceding Brenda's community announcement, a tow truck attended by a self-satisfied man wearing an HOA-branded polo shirt actually arrived at my main gate. He possessed a work order to take away my rundown old tractor. I encountered him at the gate, my demeanor one of slight astonishment. I believe there has been an error, I stated composedly. This is private land. You possess no jurisdiction here. The man, evidently one of Brenda's followers, swelled his chest. Have a work order from the HOA, ma'am. This vehicle has received multiple citations. I merely indicated the no trespassing signs, then the robust lock on the gate. If you try to access my property, I will contact the sheriff and have you taken into custody for trespassing and attempted larceny. I advise you to confer with your superiors before you perpetrate a criminal offense. He fumed for a moment, placed a call on his mobile phone, likely to Brenda, whom I pictured seething on the other line, and then, deflated, directed the tow truck operator to depart. It was a modest triumph, a minor confrontation before the principal engagement, yet it was gratifying. It also affirmed Brenda's steadfast dedication to her unlawful strategy. She was clearly not retreating. Splendid. The scene was impeccably arranged. Friday could not arrive quickly enough. I experienced a somber contentment, the same sort I used to sense when a particularly repugnant opposing lawyer was about to step into a flawlessly prepared legal snare. Brenda believed herself to be the pursuer. She was oblivious that she was the pursued, and the trap was moments from closing. Friday evening commenced, enveloped in the sort of late summer dampness that lends a sticky, strained quality to everything. The Willow Creek Estates Community Clubhouse, an edifice resembling an overinflated beige replica of a southern plantation house, was alive with motion. Lights shone brightly, vehicles packed the parking area, a veritable ocean of recent model SUVs and sedans. As per Mrs. Henderson, who had discreetly telephoned me earlier, the turnout was substantial. Brenda had evidently generated considerable excitement for her major declaration. Sarah Chin, my legal counsel, joined me at the terminus of my driveway. She was faultlessly attired in a smart navy suit, holding a leather briefcase which I knew held our collection of documents. She projected an aura of serene, concentrated resolve that I found profoundly comforting. Prepared to cast a line, Eleanor? She inquired with a subtle smile. I think the expression is shooting fish in a container, Sarah, I retorted, experiencing a wave of predatory delight myself. And Brenda has obligingly arranged them all for us. We traveled in my aged, dependable pickup truck, a calculated juxtaposition to the shining luxury automobiles prevalent in the HOA clubhouse parking area. We stopped a short distance away, not wishing to reveal our arrival too soon. We could detect the hum of the gathering from within. It was time for the main event. We orchestrated our arrival flawlessly. Brenda was already positioned at the lectern, reveling in the illumination of the spotlights and the focus of the gathered residents. She was in her natural habitat, attired in an especially vivid fuchsia pantsuit that appeared to declare, "Observe me." Her voice, magnified by the microphone, was laden with self-approval. And so, after depleting every conceivable option for polite discussion, she was stating, her intonation implying a profound, imposed burden and confronted with flagrant contempt for our community standards and property values. Your HOA board was compelled to undertake decisive measures concerning the lamentable condition of the adjacent Parker Ranch. A wave of assent passed through the attendees. I recognized a few faces, the timid treasurer, the conceited secretary, all appearing appropriately somber and significant on the dais behind her. As of this day, Brenda proceeded, her voice escalating triumphantly, the 7-day period for remediation has concluded. The requisite actions have been commenced to resolve the matter permanently. She paused for dramatic impact, a self-satisfied smile on her face. In essence, Willow Creek Estates will shortly be augmenting its attractive, well-kept surroundings, and the persistent blemish on our southern boundary will become a relic of the past. A sparse round of applause ensued. This was our signal. Sarah and I advanced calmly along the central passage, head swiveled. The applause diminished. A stillness descended upon the room as Brenda, in mid-smirk, noticed us. Her eyes narrowed, the smile solidifying on her face. Well, she uttered, her voice constricted with surprise and annoyance. Look who has chosen to appear, Mrs. Parker. A bit tardy to argue your case, wouldn't you say? I moved to the side of the stage with Sarah a pace behind me. Actually, Brenda, I responded, my voice composed but readily audible in the abrupt quiet, we are not here to argue anything. We are here to address a considerably more urgent issue of property ownership. Brenda scoffed. Property ownership? We are on the verge of owning your property, my dear. Or at least a substantial portion of it. The legal documents are already being processed to recover our expenses. This was the critical juncture. I allowed a slight, commiserating smile to form. That is intriguing, Brenda. Particularly since, before you embark on any imaginative bookkeeping regarding my ranch, we should probably tackle the rather notable matter of the land upon which this clubhouse, your quite striking fuchsia pantsuit, and indeed this entire Willow Creek Estates development are presently located. She retorted sharply. Sarah stepped forward, unfastening her briefcase. What Mrs. Parker is alluding to, Madam President and members of the HOA, Sarah declared, her voice distinct and commanding, is the inconvenient legal reality that the whole of the land constituting the Willow Creek Estates development, as defined in your own HOA plot maps, appears to be owned in fee simple by Mrs. Parker. She produced a large, laminated copy of the original 1920s lease agreement, followed by the relevant county survey map illustrating the Parker Ranch boundaries enveloping Willow Creek. This 99-year lease, granted by Mrs. Parker's great-grandfather, expired approximately 5 years ago. We can locate no record of its renewal nor any record of the Parker family ever having sold this parcel, which means, ladies and gentlemen, Sarah continued, her gaze sweeping across the astounded room, that you are, regrettably, all trespassing. The silence in the chamber was absolute, so dense it could be physically felt. Then, a collective inhalation of shock. Brenda's face, merely moments earlier flushed with triumph, had turned a sickly, pale hue, clashing dreadfully with her fuchsia attire. That's absurd, she faltered, her voice forfeiting its confident quality. Our developers, we possess deeds. Indeed, you do possess deeds, Sarah conceded smoothly. Deeds that trace back to the original lease, not to the Parker family who retain the underlying title. An expired leasehold interest, I am afraid, does not miraculously convert into fee simple ownership. Then Sarah delivered the coup de grace. She calmly began to pass out copies of a single-page summary of the legal predicament along with individually addressed envelopes for Brenda and each member of the HOA board. These, she announced, her voice resonating with quiet authority, are formal notices to cease and desist trespassing on Mrs. Parker's land and notices of intent to file for ejectment. You have 30 days to vacate the properties you currently occupy, or we will initiate legal proceedings to have you removed. The room erupted, not with applause this time, but with a cacophony of stunned exclamations, irate shouts, and alarmed murmurs. Brenda appeared as if she had been struck by lightning. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. The Queen had been toppled, not only in public but in a catastrophic manner. Her entire domain, it transpired, was established on borrowed time, and the reckoning had just arrived. The immediate consequence was pure, unmitigated bedlam. Brenda, her fuchsia attire now appearing less like a power suit and more like a jester's costume, finally recovered her voice, emitting a high-pitched, unintelligible cry of denial and fury. This is a deception, a falsehood. Security. Remove them from here, she screamed, gesturing erratically. However, the single part-time security officer present seemed as perplexed as everyone else and prudently remained stationary. Homeowners were standing, yelling inquiries, waving their own, now apparently valueless deeds, and seeking explanations from the visibly disintegrating HOA board. The timid treasurer appeared on the verge of collapse, and the inflated secretary was trying to conceal himself behind a potted plant. Sarah Chin, a pillar of composure amidst the turmoil, spoke to the assembly. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I realize this is startling. Mrs. Parker is not keen on imposing undue difficulty on blameless homeowners who were themselves deceived. Her principal concern is with the HOA's flagrant misconduct and its present leadership. She paused, allowing her gaze to settle pointedly on Brenda. We are ready to explore sensible resolutions for homeowners who desire to obtain legitimate title or lease arrangements directly with Mrs. Parker. Nevertheless, her voice firmed, the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association as an organization and its board members who instigated this unlawful action against Mrs. Parker's ranch will be held entirely responsible. That differentiation was vital. My conflict was not with the ordinary resident, many of whom were likely respectable individuals misled by aggressive developers and subsequently by a despotic HOA. My conflict was with Brenda and the corrupt apparatus she personified. Brenda, in the meantime, was experiencing a complete breakdown. Her face was distorted, her costly hairstyle disheveled. She lunged towards the podium microphone, perhaps to muster her rapidly abandoning followers, but tripped on a wire and fell heavily, her fuchsia pantsuit ending up in a most unseemly heap. It was an instance of such flawless self-caused humiliation that a few surprised snickers actually permeated the panicked commotion. In the ensuing days, the Willow Creek Estates HOA effectively dissolved. Its authority, constructed on a base of legal instability, had disappeared instantly. Brenda was, by all reports, apoplectic and then suddenly quiet, allegedly conferring with a succession of increasingly costly and doubtful lawyers. The board members, confronted with personal culpability for trespass and potential restitution, dispersed like frightened birds, with most resigning forthwith. The HOA's financial accounts were frozen, awaiting inquiry into the legitimacy of their fines and charges. It emerged that Brenda had been managing the HOA as her personal treasury for a considerable period, a reality that other incensed homeowners swiftly began to reveal once the facade of her authority was removed. My primary objective, Brenda's pretentious mansion constructed on prime Parker land with what I suspected were ill-gotten HOA funds diverted into enhancements, was at the top of my agenda. Sarah Chen presented her with a specific, non-negotiable 30-day eviction notice. There would be no negotiations for Brenda. She had attempted to seize my residence and my legacy, she would lose hers and in public. The schadenfreude was, I concede, delightful. For the other homeowners, I adopted a different strategy. I had no inclination to displace hundreds of individuals. My aim was justice, not widespread eviction. Through Sarah, I presented them with two alternatives. They could acquire the land their home occupied from me at its equitable current undeveloped appraised value, a price significantly lower than what they had paid for the house and lot combined from the developers. Or they could establish new, fair, long-term land lease agreements directly with me, featuring transparent and sensible terms completely circumventing any HOA framework. Most, after seeking advice from their own legal counsel and acknowledging the validity of my claim, chose to purchase. It represented a financial setback for some, but it afforded them clear title and liberation from the HOA ordeal. A residents' cooperative was quickly established, not to rule with an iron grip, but to collectively manage the purchase discussions and oversee the shared infrastructure. Brenda's 30 days elapsed. On the 31st day, while she was still defiantly occupying the premises, the sheriff, equipped with a court order for eviction that Sarah had proficiently obtained, appeared at her McMansion. I was not present to witness it, but Mrs. Henderson, bless her, provided me with a comprehensive, gleeful account. Apparently, Brenda had to be physically removed from the property, still vociferating about injustices and conspiracies. Her Escalade, which, as it happened, was leased and promptly repossessed, was already absent. The contents of her house were cataloged and placed into storage, awaiting her capacity to pay for their retrieval. The last I heard, she was residing in a constricted rental apartment in another county, confronting multiple legal actions from former HOA members for financial mismanagement. Her tyrannical rule was definitively concluded. The Willow Creek Estates HOA was formally disbanded, its liabilities and questionable assertions vanishing along with it. My land, was now either sold to the individual homeowners or under equitable lease to them. The ambience in the neighborhood, according to Mrs. Henderson, underwent a transformation. People began interacting with one another, cultivating gardens instead of merely adhering to stringent landscaping directives, and generally appreciating their homes without apprehension of Brenda's next decree. My ranch remained inviolate, quieter, and more serene than ever. The ancient stone walls still stood, a symbol of perseverance. The wildflowers flourished unhindered. I had not only protected my property but had also, almost by chance, liberated an entire community. So, that is the account of how an HOA president attempted to seize my ranch and ultimately became destitute, while I unintentionally became the proprietor of an entire residential area. It appears my grandfather was correct, they had merely borrowed it. And on occasion, when excessively provoked, the unassuming individuals, those who simply wish to be undisturbed with their heritage and their land, are the ones who truly warrant attention. We possess the forbearance to scrutinize the details. Brenda discovered that lesson through harsh experience. Her costly yet unrefined clothing is likely accumulating dust in a storage facility somewhere, an apt symbol for her disintegrated dominion. As for myself, I continue to enjoy tea with Mrs. Henderson, who now displays a rather ostentatious assembly of plastic flamingos on her front yard, a cheerful gesture of defiance against a despotism that has ceased to be. The world could benefit from more such minor acts of resistance.